Welcome to Noah's Narratives, where every story is more than just words. It's an experience that draws you in and keeps you hooked. Today, we're diving into a tale so gripping, you won't want to miss a second, so make sure you stay with me till the end. Before we begin, let's connect. Drop a comment below and tell me, what city and country are you watching from? I'd love to know where my amazing viewers are tuning in from around the world. And if you're a fan of stories that captivate and inspire, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves a great story, and subscribe to the channel, so you're always the first to catch the next adventure. Now let's get into it. It was a day like any other, a bustling airport filled with hurried footsteps, the crackling announcements of delayed flights, and the faint hum of jet engines. But for Captain Jonathan Miles, it was a quiet day. A day to sit back, relax, and simply be a passenger on his way to his granddaughter's birthday. After 3 decades in the sky as one of the most respected pilots in aviation, Jonathan had long since retired. Today, he wore no uniform, only a modest jacket and faded jeans. To the world, he was just another traveler in economy class. But to one flight attendant, he was a target for ridicule. The moment Captain Jonathan Miles stepped onto the plane, Ethan, the flight attendant, noticed him, not with curiosity or welcome, but with that dismissive, sizing-up glance that told Jonathan exactly what Ethan thought of him. "Excuse me, sir," Ethan said, his tone laced with thinly veiled irritation. "Can I help you find your seat? Economy class is that way." Jonathan smiled politely and showed his boarding pass. "I'm in 12B right here." Ethan blinked, momentarily thrown off. Seat 12B wasn't in economy, it was in the premium section. His polished facade faltered, but only for a moment, before his lips twisted into a forced smile. "Well, enjoy your upgrade," he muttered, walking away before Jonathan could respond. But that wasn't the end of it. As Jonathan settled into his seat, Ethan hovered nearby, fussing over other passengers in a showy manner. When it came time to serve refreshments, Ethan walked past Jonathan's row entirely. When Jonathan gently signaled for attention, Ethan sighed theatrically and sauntered over. "Yes, sir?" Ethan asked, his voice dripping with exaggerated politeness. "Is there a problem?" "I'd just like some water, please," Jonathan said calmly. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Water? Sure, I'll get to that." Jonathan watched as Ethan returned minutes later, balancing the glass precariously. As he leaned over to hand it to Jonathan, his hand tipped just enough for the water to spill onto Jonathan's lap. "Oh dear," Ethan said, not bothering to hide the smirk playing at his lips. "Clumsy me. You should really watch where you're sitting." The other passengers glanced over, some in concern, others pretending not to notice. Jonathan, however, simply nodded. "Accidents happen," he replied, his tone neutral. But Ethan wasn't done. As the turbulence began, he walked past Jonathan, muttering under his breath loud enough for Jonathan to hear. "Funny how some people think they can buy a better seat and suddenly belong." When the plane shook violently, Ethan stumbled but didn't lose his snark. "Sir, you might want to hold on. We wouldn't want someone to fall out of their place." Pause. What would you have done in Jonathan's shoes? If you want to hear more stories of resilience and humanity, kindly subscribe to our channel and be part of a growing community that values powerful storytelling. Now let's go on with this amazing story. Jonathan remained silent, his composure unshaken despite the pointed remarks. He had heard worse in his lifetime. He had learned long ago not to waste his energy on every insult hurled his way. Then halfway through the journey, the flight took an unexpected turn. As the flight cruised at 35,000 feet, all seemed routine. The gentle hum of the engines and the chatter of passengers filled the cabin. But beneath the surface, the plane was heading straight into a mechanical nightmare. It started subtly, just a slight shudder that most passengers barely noticed. Jonathan Miles, however, felt it immediately. Years of experience told him this wasn't ordinary turbulence. His instincts sharpened as the shudder turned into violent jerks, and the plane began to lose altitude. Then came the dreaded announcement from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a mechanical issue with one of our engines. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Cabin crew, prepare for possible emergency procedures. Panic erupted. What happens next will leave you speechless. But before we dive in, make sure you subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. Are you feeling this story? It gets more interesting here. Passengers gripped their armrests, whispered prayers, and looked around for answers. The cabin crew moved swiftly but nervously, their calm exteriors betraying their fear. Ethan, the flight attendant who had spent most of the flight belittling Jonathan, was no exception. His usual smugness was replaced with a pale, trembling face as he tried to keep up appearances. In the cockpit, the situation was dire. One of the engines had completely failed, and a malfunction in the hydraulic system left the pilots struggling to control the plane. The co-pilot, overwhelmed by the stress, had fainted, leaving the captain to manage the crisis alone. Alarms blared, lights flashed, and critical systems were failing one by one. Without immediate intervention, the plane was on a trajectory toward disaster. Jonathan unbuckled his seatbelt, his years of training overriding any fear. He knew exactly what needed to be done. As he stood, Ethan spotted him and immediately blocked his path. "Sir, sit down." Ethan snapped, his voice shaking. "This is an emergency. You can't just—" Jonathan locked eyes with him, his voice steady and commanding. "I'm a pilot. I can help." Ethan scoffed, still clinging to his biases. "You a pilot? This isn't some kind of joke." Jonathan interrupted him, his tone firm and unwavering. "I've flown this aircraft model for over 20 years. I'm not asking, I'm telling you to step aside." The authority in Jonathan's voice silenced Ethan, who reluctantly moved out of the way. Jonathan hurriedly made his way to the cockpit, where the captain was frantically trying to stabilize the aircraft. The sight of Jonathan entering the cockpit was met with hesitation, but the desperation in the captain's eyes quickly turned to relief when Jonathan introduced himself. "I'm Captain Jonathan Miles, retired," he said. "I've flown this model for decades. Let me help." Without hesitation, the captain nodded and briefed Jonathan on the situation. The aircraft was in a partial stall due to the engine failure, and the malfunctioning hydraulics made it nearly impossible to control the rudder and ailerons. To make matters worse, they were rapidly losing altitude over mountainous terrain. Jonathan immediately took the co-pilot's seat, his hands steady as he analyzed the instruments. "We'll have to rely on manual inputs and throttle control to stabilize," he said. "Start by shutting down non-essential systems to preserve power. I'll take the controls." The captain followed Jonathan's instructions, and together they worked to stabilize the aircraft. Using his deep understanding of the plane's mechanics, Jonathan adjusted the throttle to compensate for the failed engine, manually controlled the flaps to reduce drag, and carefully navigated the aircraft away from the mountains. On the ground, air traffic control had cleared a runway for an emergency landing. But with limited hydraulic control, landing would be the ultimate challenge. Jonathan communicated with air traffic control, calculating the approach with precision. Every adjustment was deliberate, every command calm and clear. The passengers, unaware of the full extent of the danger, could feel the plane leveling out, a faint glimmer of hope returning. As the plane approached the runway, Jonathan guided it with remarkable precision. The landing gear deployed, but without full hydraulic functionality, the touchdown would be rough. With one final adjustment, Jonathan brought the plane down, the tires screeching against the tarmac. The aircraft skidded but stayed on course, finally coming to a halt. Cheers erupted from the passengers, tears streaming down faces as relief washed over them. In the cockpit, the captain turned to Jonathan, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Captain Miles, you saved us all. If you're as moved by Jonathan's courage and transformation as we are, don't miss out on more inspiring stories like this. Kindly hit that subscribe button and join us as we uncover more tales that challenge and uplift." As Jonathan exited the cockpit, he was met with stunned silence from the cabin crew. Ethan, still shaken, approached him hesitantly. "Captain Miles," he stammered, his voice barely audible. I didn't know. I'm so sorry for—" Jonathan held up a hand, stopping him. His voice was calm but firm. "Respect isn't something you give after someone proves themselves. It's something you give because every person deserves it." Ethan nodded, unable to meet Jonathan's gaze. As the passengers applauded their quiet hero, Jonathan didn't stay for the praise. He simply gathered his belongings and stepped off the plane, leaving behind a lesson that would linger far longer than the turbulence. In the face of crisis, Captain Jonathan Miles didn't just save lives, he dismantled prejudice and reminded everyone aboard that greatness isn't defined by appearance but by character, skill, and grace under pressure. The story of Captain Jonathan Miles's heroic actions spread like wildfire. News outlets hailed him as a hero, passengers recounted the tale with awe, and the airline industry buzzed with admiration. The airline company, desperate to recover from the potential scandal of a mid-flight crisis, knew they owed Jonathan more than just gratitude. Weeks later, Jonathan received an invitation from the airline, a formal letter embossed with gold, lettering inviting him to an honorary gala. The event, they explained, was being organized specifically to celebrate his bravery, skill, and humanity. Though Jonathan was a humble man who preferred to stay out of the spotlight, he accepted the invitation. He saw the event not as an opportunity for personal recognition but as a platform to share a message that the world needed to hear. The night of the gala arrived, and the venue was nothing short of spectacular. A grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers, and rows of elegantly dressed attendees filled the space. Airline executives, pilots, cabin crew, and passengers from the fateful flight were all in attendance. At the center of the room was a stage, adorned with banners that read, "Honoring Excellence, a tribute to Captain Jonathan Miles." As Jonathan entered the room, he was met with a standing ovation. People clapped, cheered, and even wiped tears from their eyes. For the passengers who had been on that flight, seeing Jonathan again was a deeply emotional moment. Even Ethan, the flight attendant who had once dismissed him, stood in the corner, looking both humbled and grateful. The CEO of the airline took the stage, her voice filled with reverence. "Tonight, we honor a man who not only saved lives but also reminded us of the values that should guide our industry and our humanity. Captain Jonathan Miles, your actions on that day were nothing short of extraordinary. We are forever in your debt." With that, she invited Jonathan to the stage. The crowd erupted into applause once more as he stepped up to the microphone, his presence calm and commanding. He paused for a moment, letting the applause die down, and then began to speak. "Thank you all for this incredible honor. I'm deeply humbled to stand here tonight. But let me begin by saying this. I didn't do what I did for recognition or reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because when you're in a position to help, you help. It's that simple. That day I wasn't just saving a plane, I was protecting lives. Lives of people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different stories. And in that moment, none of those differences mattered. What mattered was our shared humanity. But as much as I'd like to focus solely on the triumph of that day, I need to address something that's just as important. The challenges we face as a society, prejudice, bias, and the inability to see beyond someone's appearance or circumstances. These are barriers we must break down. I'm not here to single anyone out or place blame. Instead, I want to offer a reminder. Greatness isn't determined by the color of your skin, your attire, or the assumptions people make about you. It's determined by your character, your skill, and your willingness to rise to the occasion. Throughout my career, I've learned that excellence doesn't just mean being good at what you do. It means treating people with respect no matter who they are. It means listening, learning, and leaving your judgments behind. And it means holding yourself to the highest standards, not just in your profession, but in your humanity. To the airline industry, I say this: let this be a moment of reflection. Let's ensure that our policies and practices uphold equality and respect. Let's celebrate diversity and create opportunities for people of all backgrounds to thrive. And to everyone in this room, I leave you with this: be excellent at what you do, not for recognition, but because excellence has a way of elevating everyone around you. Treat others with dignity, not because they've earned it, but because they deserve it as human beings. And remember, in the moments that matter most, it's not the labels we carry that define us, it's the choices we make. Thank you, and let's continue to soar, not just as individuals, but as a community united by shared values." The room fell silent as Jonathan's words sank in, and then erupted into thunderous applause. People stood clapping and cheering, some with tears streaming down their faces. Even Ethan, who had been avoiding Jonathan's gaze all evening, approached him afterward. With a trembling voice he said, "Captain Miles, your words, your actions, they've changed the way I see the world. I'm sorry for how I treated you." Jonathan placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and smiled. "It's never too late to change," he said gently. That night, the gala wasn't just a celebration of Jonathan's heroism. It became a call to action, a reminder of the power of humanity, and a beacon of hope for a future free of prejudice. And as Jonathan left the stage, the legacy of his words and actions continued to inspire everyone who had the privilege of hearing his story. Captain Jonathan Miles didn't just save a plane, he uplifted a room, challenged a system, and inspired a movement. In the end, his greatest legacy wasn't just his skill in the cockpit, but his unwavering belief in the dignity and potential of every human being. The story of Captain Jonathan Miles wasn't just about one heroic act. It became a movement, a testament to what humanity could achieve. When prejudice was set aside, and excellence, humility and compassion were allowed to shine. As the gala concluded, the airline CEO made an announcement that left the room in awe. "Captain Miles," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "on behalf of our airline, and in recognition of your extraordinary courage, we would like to present you with a token of our gratitude. Outside this very building, you will find a brand new Rolls-Royce Phantom waiting for you. And additionally, we are awarding you $5 million in cash, as a thank you for saving not only lives, but the reputation of our company." The audience gasped, and a wave of applause erupted once more. Jonathan, ever the humble man, looked genuinely taken aback. As the CEO handed him the symbolic check and keys, he simply nodded and said, "Thank you. I will make sure this kindness serves a purpose beyond myself." This is just one of the many stories we bring to shed light on important issues and inspire change. Kindly subscribe now to stay connected and join us in spreading messages of hope, unity, and progress. The following week, Jonathan made good on his promise. Without hesitation, he donated 20% of his $5 million reward, $1 million to a non-profit organization dedicated to fighting racism and racial profiling. This wasn't just any organization. It was one Jonathan had researched thoroughly, ensuring its trustworthiness and its commitment to grassroots education and systemic change. The organization, aptly named Unity First, used its resources to create workshops, campaigns, and public seminars to sensitize people about racism, unconscious bias, and the destructive nature of racial profiling. The donation allowed them to expand their reach, bringing their message to schools, workplaces, and communities across the country. When asked why he made such a significant contribution, Jonathan's answer was simple. "I don't need all this money to live comfortably, but I know what it feels like to be judged unfairly. If my story and my actions can prevent just one person from facing that kind of bias, then it's worth every penny." His generosity didn't go unnoticed. News outlets covered the story, and the non-profit began to see a surge in volunteers and support. Jonathan's donation didn't just bolster the organization financially, it amplified their voice, giving their mission a platform they had only dreamed of. But perhaps the most profound impact was on Ethan, the flight attendant whose prejudice had once clouded his judgment. For weeks after the flight and the gala, Ethan wrestled with guilt and self-reflection. He replayed his words and actions in his mind, realizing just how deeply his biases had influenced him. But Ethan didn't let that guilt consume him. Instead, he chose to transform it into action. He began attending workshops hosted by Unity First, sitting in the back of the room, listening intently and learning. Slowly but surely, he began to unlearn the prejudices he had carried for so long. One day, during a flight, Ethan overheard a passenger make a disparaging comment about another traveler based on their appearance. The old Ethan might have stayed silent, afraid to get involved. But the new Ethan, someone who now saw himself as a symbol of change, couldn't let it slide. He stepped forward, his voice firm but respectful. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "On this flight, we treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look. I hope you'll do the same." The passenger looked taken aback, but nodded, falling silent. Ethan felt a sense of pride, not for himself, but for the fact that he had finally found the courage to do what was right. From that day on, Ethan made it his mission to speak out whenever he witnessed racial bias. Check this out. Stories like this remind us of the power of change. If you believe in the importance of sharing such messages, subscribe and be part of a community making a difference. Together, we can keep these conversations going. Ethan joined Unity First as a volunteer, sharing his story with others and using his experience as an example of how people can change. Over time, he became a respected advocate for equality, his once prejudiced heart now a beacon of hope and humility. As the years went by, Jonathan's name became synonymous with heroism and humanity. His actions inspired not just a single company or a single industry, but countless individuals who realized the importance of excellence, respect, and unity. Ethan, too, became a living testament to the idea that change is possible. His journey from prejudice to advocacy touched the lives of many, proving that even the most stubborn biases could be overcome with education, empathy, and courage. And so, the legacy of that fateful flight became more than just a story of survival. It became a story of transformation, of how one man's courage not only saved lives, but also ignited a movement that reminded the world that greatness isn't found in our differences, but in the humanity that unites us all. Captain Jonathan Miles didn't just land a plane that day, he lifted an entire world closer to understanding, to compassion, and to a future where humanity soars above prejudice. And for Ethan, the man who once couldn't see beyond his biases, Jonathan's story became his compass, guiding him to be a symbol of the change we all hope to see in the world. Captain Jonathan Miles's story is a powerful reminder of the strength of humanity and the courage to rise above prejudice. What do you think about this incredible journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more impactful stories. Let's keep the conversation alive and work toward a world united by compassion and understanding. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.